Hi everyone, I'm Russ Terry and welcome to this episode of Real Talk on Racism. We're grateful to you for watching. We have another excellent guest in store for you. Joan Green is owner and CEO of Together We Love, an organization helping biracial kids and women in interracial relationships navigate these two worlds. Joan, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. This is wonderful.
Well, thank you for saying the kind words. I'm happy to have you here. So you are our first white woman guest here on Real Talk on Racism. Why is it important for those of us who are white to be consciously and outwardly anti-racist?
Thank you, and thanks for having me on your show. And I think what my guiding principle is the quote that I just love from Maya Angelou, and it's, as I'm sure you've all heard it, but it is, do the best you can until you know better, and when you know better, do better. And I think that sort of sums up the white community at this point in time and what our responsibility is, that as we learn little by little from all of the events that have been happening in our culture, it is our responsibility and our challenge to take action and do something different. And so that's what really kind of gets me going. Yeah.
I love that you use the word responsibility, because I think so many white people are busy living their own lives and don't realize the gravity of what people of color have to endure, deal with, face, etc. And if we take on the responsibility, then that reduces, at least to some extent, the burden that's on people of color.
Exactly, and they feel it so much. And I think that's what I'm trying to help people navigate a little bit too. So
at what point did you first become passionate about anti-racism, diversity, etc.?
It's a great question. It's been a lifelong journey, but it wasn't until the murder of George Floyd and the preceding events that I really understood that I needed to reflect on who I was and how I was living my life. So I'm married to Kevin. He's a black man, and we have 3 beautiful biracial children, and they're young adults right now. And so at that point, when George Floyd was murdered, we had been married about 28 years. And we were sitting around having dinner at the table, and I could just feel the sense of loss from my children and my husband. And I didn't have that same deep sense of loss. I was angry, and I was hurt, and I was, I'm a human, and I just couldn't believe that had happened. But I didn't realize how they were internalizing it until that moment in time. And so I had to stop and sort of reflect on, why wasn't I feeling the same thing they were feeling? Now, I can never walk a day in their shoes. I can't be black or biracial. But as a wife and a mom, it really kind of hit me hard. And so I started looking back over my life and realized, I had been placed in many, many diverse situations, very blessed throughout my entire career, and never even realized that I had opportunity at those times to make an impact, to do something anti-racist. I just kind of went about being a part of things that I didn't know. So I think it was then, and it was reflecting back on who I've been and how I've lived my life, and I realized, okay, it's time to do something different.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that. So I was telling Joan before the show, I'm reading this amazing book called Real Life by Brandon Taylor. Shout out to Brandon Taylor.
Yeah.
He's an excellent, I think, first-time author. And I'm going to read an excerpt which ties into what she just said. So Wallace, the main character, kind of says or experiences, there will always be this moment. There will always be good white people who love him and want the best for him, but who are more afraid of other white people than of letting him down. It's easier for them to let it happen and to triage the wound later than to introduce an element of the unknown into the situation. Right. No matter how good they are, no matter how loving, they will always be complicit, a danger, a wound waiting to happen. So basically it's saying that in this example, the white people, while well-intentioned, didn't speak up on behalf of him or to defend him or to say something to the white people who said something racist to him or about him. And I think it's something that I definitely folded the corner of that page down when I read it, and it's relevant to the show because I think, as we think about it in our own lives, I'll speak for myself, I know there are those moments where I could have spoken up and should have spoken up and didn't speak up, but like you said, like Maya Angelou says, when we know better, we do better.
Right, right, absolutely. And I think I can go back in my whole life and count how many times, but especially since I've been married and taking for granted that he's my husband, these are my children, and we just did life as a family. But there are so many times throughout where I could have stood up and educated somebody else, if nothing else, right? Just to help self-educate or educate others, I think is important too.
Yeah. Okay. So what is a specific challenge that your husband has faced because he's Black?
So, I'd love to have him here to speak to that because, again, it's his internal compass, but he definitely has faced racism at all different levels. So when we got married, we moved to a very diverse county of Maryland, and we did it intentionally, for sure. So no matter where he worked, though, he would still be in situations where it was predominantly white and that kind of thing. And so there was an example where he was at work, and we have a big, beautiful community park nearby his work at that time, and he decided that he would just take his lunch that I made him every day. He'd go sit in the park, roll the windows down, and eat his lunch. And so one example was on a day a white woman drove up. She got out with her dog. She looked over at my husband, and she took her dog out to go to the bathroom, got back in her car, and left. And within 15 minutes, 6 police cars pulled up around my husband and the car. And they stopped. They asked for his license, registration. He put his hands up. He did everything that his parents had taught him to do, of course, right? And they realized, they asked him what he was doing, and he's like, "Oh, I'm eating my lunch." And they were like, "Oh, Mr. Green, we're really sorry about that, but we had to investigate because we got a call." So he continued to go back to that park because he had the right to be in a public park, and it's a beautiful location. And his work didn't really have like a place for lunch. About 2 weeks later, he was back again, same woman, same car, same dog. She gets out, she gets right back in. Don't you know, the 6 cops come back again. Yep. And so, when I think of things like that, they did the same thing, more apologetic this time, but they did check his license and registration again. He showed them his sandwich, and he did it again. And so that's within the last 10 years of our marriage so far. It's still happening to him over and over again.
In a diverse
area, right.
Which, again, you've seen these incidents in Central Park and other places, where I think finally there are some ramifications to the Karens, the women who, call the police on a Black person who's sitting there eating his lunch. And, I mean, it's just awful. I think for those of us as a white person, we can't believe that a person of color
has to go through this.
Yeah, have to go through this.
So when I go back to my awareness, when this first happened, he came home and he was very upset. And I listened, and then I said, "Oh my gosh, I'm sorry that happened to you. What would you like for dinner?" And that was the extent of my compassion, right, and my understanding. And so the second time it happened, I felt a little worse for him. He was a little more angry, but he also handles it so beautifully because it's been happening all his life. This is not new to my husband, nor for our children. And so same thing, I was kind of like, "Gosh, I'm so sorry that happened. Should we do anything?" He's like, "There's nothing we can do. Done." But now, my reflection, like I said, and I'm sure I'll say that word 100 times during our conversation, but now I look back and I think, wait a minute, I should have stopped everything, sat down with him, opened a discussion, found out how he was feeling, and I didn't do that. And I think for women in interracial relationships and marriages, that's often what we do, is we just know they're going to be okay because they're our husbands and we've known them for so long, and we trust that they're handling it. What I know now is he needs the person to talk to understand, and at his time, not in my time, right? So part of the thing that I try to help women with is when and how do I open that conversation, and asking permission to talk with him about those type of things and giving him space and time. And I think that has been kind of a game changer in our relationship for sure.
Well, we all have so much to learn, and
yes,
I'm on my journey, you're on your journey, and we're trying to help others, which I think is that's our mission. That's why
for sure
we are here. What about either your biracial children or biracial kids in general? What are challenges that they often face?
Yeah, so we had talked earlier, and I would love for them to be able to share how they feel about that with you one day. But what I can say is probably the word identity, determining, and actually most people expect them to choose a side. So they often have to decide, am I more Black? Am I more white? Do I have to be more black? Do I have to be more white? In this situation, which fits best? And I know that my children don't want that. They just want to be people, whole people. So that's a part of it. And then the other piece is when they were little, an example I can give you, and I say this a lot, is I was in the grocery store and I have all 3 kids with me. And you're going through and people will stop you in line and say, so what are your children? And I'm like, what are they? They're children. And then the next question always is, and what is their dad? And so my answers are, they're children and he's a man. And I realized that, again, my reflection in that moment, I was being a little sassy and I was trying to make the other person uncomfortable because I didn't want the questions. Back to kind of what you just said, I didn't want to take a stand because I didn't know what to say. And so when I look back on it, my actual answer should have been, or could have been, my children are biracial. Their father is black, African American. I am white, full-fledged white. And what other questions do you have? And then I could have dropped the little pebble in and started the ripple effect. But instead, at that point, I made the choice to kind of just get out of the situation. So when it comes to kids, I think that's one of the biggest things, is being very open and honest and transparent about who they are, about both sides of your family, and helping them navigate that from a young age.
And it's interesting because this has been one of the themes on the show.
Yeah.
In the episodes that we've had, the things white people say
Right.
that are at best impolite and
Right.
are at worst, racist and
Microaggressions. And
microaggressions,
yes,
exactly.
yes.
Our second guest, Ken Rip Ross, people would say to him, "Where are you from?" And he'd say, "I'm from San Francisco," and
Right.
they'd say, "No,
No,
where are you
where are you
really
from?" Right,
And it's like,
right.
"Where are you from?" or "What are they?"
Right.
I mean, our advice to white people is, think before speaking,
Right.
and you don't have to ask people of color or white people who are with people of color everything that's on your mind. You can have a thought,
Have a filter,
and
right.
let it pass, and have a filter. Yeah.
And I would also say for white women, especially moms and wives or partners, I feel like you have to be prepared. So I kind of have an arsenal now of what should I say in a situation so that I am educating the other person. And it may not sink in, but if I don't say what will help them, then I'm not stepping up to my responsibility. On the other hand, what if they do hear me and they go back and they tell somebody at home, and that person might tell somebody else, and then we're starting some type of a conversation that wouldn't have been out there.
So, Joan, what have you done to educate yourself since the George Floyd murder?
So I kind of have to laugh. I did what everybody else did. I read every book I could. I jumped into white fragility. I jumped into So Do You Want to Talk About Race? I read Be the Bridge. I've done all of the books and many more. And I don't laugh at because I think that's a really great way to start, but I didn't know where to go. I didn't know what to do. I found myself at the beginning falling back on my husband and my children. And to your point earlier, that isn't the role that they need to play right now. They need me to take the responsibility to self-educate. So the other thing that I found really helpful is a lot of documentary types shows on TV and watching shows from a different lens. So an example is Soul of a Nation. That was a mini series and it was so impactful. And sometimes it's hard to sit through that as a white person and say, I get it, or I don't get it. And so my husband and I did that together. And he could help me along, but I was present, so he wasn't teaching me everything. Another silly example is Blackish, the TV show. It's hysterical, and we laugh, but there is a message in that show, and I now am looking at it not only for the message as well as the entertainment. And then the final thing I did, and a part of this journey, in addition to that dinner that I spoke to earlier about, one of my dear friends called me after George Floyd was murdered, and she said, "How are you?" And she's white, married to a black man as well. And I said, "What do you mean?" She goes, "How are you?" And I said, I'm confused, and I didn't know what to do. And so from that conversation, I realized that I needed to speak to women like me and find out how was everybody else navigating. And that, I think, has opened up just a new world to me, and that's kind of where this business came out of. So spending time talking to women who are also in interracial relationships at any level has been just eye-opening.
I'm sure,
Yeah,
yes.
it's been great.
There are a couple of things that you said earlier that I want to go back to.
Sure,
so
of course.
first you said you read a lot of books, and that. I think there are probably a lot of white people out there that have not read one or more
It's probably true,
of
right.
those books.
Right.
So what is, would you say, the number one book that you would recommend for somebody watching this that wants to learn more?
Well, that's a really great question. So I tend to lead with faith. So if faith is your journey, Be the Bridge is a really great book. And oftentimes you can get that in like a book study too and do that with other people. That one made me really look at the history of my own family and realize kind of how I grew up, why I had white privilege, how I benefited from it. And that I thought was really eye-opening. I think, so you want to talk about race, I listened to that on an audiobook, and the author was just in my ear. So that one was really great. And then the other piece is like Emmanuel Aiko, he has a podcast and he talks a lot about different types of racism. So I listened to a lot of podcasts, Brene Brown, all of those too. So.
And it's great. Brene Brown, obviously, is a white person
Yes,
who talks
right.
about this
and
stuff.
her guests are phenomenal, and she's so open, just like you are. She's amazingly open to learning, which I think is great.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you specifically said white privilege, because I think for those of us who are white, we subconsciously or consciously don't look at ourselves as privileged,
Right.
but the reality is we are privileged, we have been privileged,
true.
and I think it's very beneficial for us to pause and recognize that, because a lot of people of color don't have that privilege and have to navigate life in a tougher set of circumstances.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Speaking of which, you alluded to earlier when your husband got swarmed by police
Right.
officers for eating his lunch. You said what his parents taught him to do.
Yeah.
So this is a real thing among
is.
people of color. As parents are raising them, parents will tell their kids, if you're pulled over by the police,
Yes.
you put your hands on the wheel.
You say, yes, sir, you look straight now, you don't reach for anything, whatever all of the things are. And from talking to the women who I have met over this period of time who have biracial children, some of our kids are lighter skinned and don't necessarily identify or look as black as others, but some do. And that's a common theme, is the moms, the white moms, are highly concerned about their son's safety, especially.
Just like black women are concerned
Exactly.
about their son's
They
safety.
really
Yeah.
are. And for us, that's a conversation we've never had to have, though, right? So we're white women. We never were brought up with that conversation. And so now we're having to have that conversation with our children, or we're forcing our husbands to have it with our children. And again, we're putting it back on them. So one thing we talk about is learn how to have the conversation and then address your children the way a black mom would address their children and figure that out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and you said a second ago, putting it back on them.
Right.
Making the black husband teach the
Have the
biracial
conversation,
children,
sure.
which is an additional burden in addition to all the other burdens. And
Right.
there's this phrase I used that we mentioned before I came on the air, that inclusion exhaustion.
Yeah.
People of color who not only have to navigate racism and busy life and jobs, etc., but now have to educate those of us well-intentioned white people who
Right.
want to learn. So it's this added job or
It
burden
sure is.
that I think just puts more on their plate.
It really does. Yeah.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Okay. All right. So I went back to the questions
great.
that I had prior. I want to shift gears a little bit. So
Sure.
you have your own podcast, Navigating Two Worlds with Joan Green. What's been the most compelling insight shared so far on the show?
So the most compelling has come from not only the women who are in interracial marriages, but I think I'm also speaking to professionals who are in the diversity field, and it's all aligned. It goes back to self-education. It goes back to when you know better, do better. I think I've come away with leading with love, and love as an action verb, and not just love it, but to go do something out of love for the people in your life. That's probably the biggest takeaway that I've had, is talking about it is great, but if we don't take action, we're not really fulfilling that mission of loving others. And that can go outside of your home, but especially with your spouse, your children, and your close family members.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's shift gears and talk about the workplace.
Sure.
So I know you spent many years working in retail leadership, and
I have.
I know for me, I've observed that a lot of the service industries, you know, retail, servers, you know, any kind of entry-level workers are
Right.
often disproportionately people of color, especially in those entry-level, you know, hourly type jobs. Um, what has been your experience in terms of the places you've worked
Yeah.
and what the demographics are of some of the workers there?
So I've been blessed to be in organizations who always embrace diversity. And we did a lot of work around that in every organization I've worked in. But what I know to be true is what you're saying, right? I think because of the systemic issues that we have, people of color don't have the opportunities as easily, you know, in front of them. They will only be offered the jobs that they can get to with transportation, that there's the social inequity that is out there. So I know it to be true. I don't have any statistics to back it up, but like I said, I also know that there are organizations who do good work and they intentionally hire people that may not have that opportunity, and I think that's really important too.
Yeah, and you know, I can tell you've done all of your homework. I mean, the systemic racism, you know, you don't hear white people say systemic racism very often. You know, or at
It's
least
hard
I
to say,
don't.
Russ. It's a hard thing to say, and it's hard to say I am a product of white privilege. But I think if you don't get those words out and become comfortable with them, it's hard to move forward,
Yeah.
right, as a white person.
Yeah, and I think the more of us white people who
Yeah,
talk
agreed.
about that systemic racism and white privilege are things, then hopefully it'll inspire other white people to
To do the
be
same.
on this mission and learn more and do more.
Agreed.
So, what's a situation you've been in that you've been corrected, if you will,
Yeah.
or said something that you shouldn't have?
Yeah, so I had to really think back on that. And one of the examples I have is when I was working in retail. I worked in a store. I was a store manager for a store, and I was one of two white people. All of the rest of the staff were African American, up to 60 people, and even on the holidays, over 100. Like, we hired and hired and hired, but the clientele, the location, it was all Baltimore area. And so I think there were many times where I came in just with my, you know, we can do this, and you guys don't worry about it, I've got it. And I don't know, I remember speaking. Now looking back, I didn't know it then, Russ. You know, looking back, I remember watching, maybe not even being corrected, but seeing my employees turn away from me, just shaking their head. Or we'd be doing work at, you know, after closing, trying to clean up the store, and I would start chatting about my life and things, and you could just see them kind of deflate. So I feel like as I look back, I don't know that I was directly corrected, but it was a course correction because I could feel it, right? Also, you know, I shared with you, my husband definitely is really good at kind of calling me out, just in a very positive, loving way, because he wants to make sure that I'm continuing on this journey to learn what to say and when to say it and when not to, right?
Yeah, and I told you off camera, but I'll say it on camera, you know, the example I can think of when I was corrected after George Floyd was murdered later that week, I posted on Facebook, you know, it's been a rough week for people of color.
Yeah.
And my best friend, who was a black woman, messaged me privately, which I'm grateful to her
Right.
for doing that, to say that, you know, it's been more than a rough week for black people in America. And, you know, here I was, a well-intentioned white person who is trying to do something good,
Right.
but, you know, was clumsy about it or didn't think about that, you know, or just didn't, you know, whatever. So I'm grateful that she corrected me, and now, you know, if I have something sensitive to say or ask, sometimes I'll get a person of color to review it if they're open to
Agreed.
it.
Yeah.
But then that goes back to the inclusion exhaustion. You know, it's not
Right.
their job to
No.
proofread the things that I want to
Right.
say.
Right.
So picking and choosing when it makes sense to do that.
Yeah, and I found in my journey too that a couple of my people that I had met, neighbors or friends that I had met over the years, actually reached out to me when I started posting and when I started Together We Love, and they commended me on doing the good work. So that meant so much because they thought that I was heading down the right path in support of them. And so those two women especially, never hesitate to pick up the phone. And they have shared, I will always be here. Please ask me a question. But I think you kind of need to get those people in your corner so that you're not wondering, can I lean on them or not? So I got the permission, and I utilize it as much as I can. Yeah.
Have you experienced incidents where white people, whether your family or otherwise, said things to you that were racist?
I would say probably yes, throughout my whole life. Again, not being aware. And now I'm so highly aware that I don't put myself in situations where I think that might happen, first of all. And then second of all, if, for example, a joke, somebody tells a joke and it's about a black person or any racist joke, I will be the first one to say that was inappropriate. Please. And it's hard because you don't want to be the buzzkill of the conversation. But I'm very confident in stopping that or stepping away or talking to the person afterwards and saying, you know what, that really was poor taste and a microaggression and unacceptable. And I found myself with more confidence in doing that over the last couple of years than I would have ever done, for sure.
Because I think there are situations where we as white people hear those maybe more than people of color do, because the white person doesn't want to say it in front of the person of color.
Right.
But then that makes it incumbent on us to have the courage to speak up and pull the person aside and, as you said, say it was inappropriate.
Yeah.
All right, we have about 30 to 60 seconds left. What final insight do you want to share for anybody watching today that wants to learn more about systemic racism in the U.S.?
Well, I think do your self-education work. Take time to learn. Let's all try to lead with love. Let's try to see something good in everybody, no matter what their color. Because when you stop and do that, the way you're looking at them just changes immediately. And when you lead with love and when you show others through action that they are a part of your world as well, I think, it goes back to that little ripple effect. And kind of to wrap it back up, now that we know better, we need to do better.
All right, Joan Green, owner and CEO of Together We Love. I'm Russ Terry. Thank you so much for being here, Joan. Great to have you.
Really enjoyed it.
And we're grateful to you for watching. We'll see you next time on Real Talk on Racism.